So what should we film today?
I'm reading.
You shush.
I mean, we could do what those very cute YouTubers sometimes do, where they swap their TBRs and the boyfriend reads the girlfriend's TBR and vice versa. That's a thing.
Care to explain that particular acronym for the people unfamiliar?
Well, TBR stands for to be read, so we'd swap what books we're about to read.
Nice exposition.
Thank you, I wrote it myself. So what are you reading?
Oh, I'm reading Changeless. It's the second book in a series of 5 where it's like steampunky and there's vampires and werewolves in it, and there's a love story, and it's really quite funny too.
Sounds terrible. Have you got book 1?
You know I do. You wrote this script.
Well, book number 1 it is.
So what are you reading?
I am reading Black Holes and Baby Universes and Other Essays by Stephen Hawking.
Reading anything else?
Bien sûr, Le Hobbit par J.R.R. Tolkien. Je l'ai reçu de mon ami Charles Heathcote.
Oh, oui. Anything else?
I've got Jurassic Park.
That'll do. Well now, let's see. We've got a Victorian London backdrop. I'm in a very pretty but basically anachronous costume. Now this must be the Soulless review. Oh, that means Dane's around here somewhere. Oh, maybe he's dressed as Lord McCunn, the dashing, ravishing Scottish alpha werewolf male. Oh, I'm gonna need a fan for this.
Hello, darling.
Hi, sweetheart.
You look beautiful.
So do you.
Thank you.
Let's take a look. You do please the lesbian in me. I can make this work. Tell us about Soulless, the book I love so much.
Oh, it was terrible.
No, it wasn't.
No, it wasn't. It wasn't all bad. It was all right. You oversold the steampunk to me. I thought it was going to be more steampunk than it was. I thought that the customs and all that stuff and the interrelationship between people and like the politics of what they're wearing and who's married who and stuff, that was all very Victorian.
Yes.
But the actual like the setting of the book itself, it felt like it could have just as easily been in space.
What about the science labs at the end? That was all steam-powered machines.
Oh yeah. I don't know, I got a bit bored by that point, to be honest.
Okay, clearly not your genre.
It's like thrillers where I don't go out of my way to read loads of them because
Yeah.
I read so many of them anyway. So this has got like loads of YA cliches in. You know, if you're into YA, that's fine, I guess, but I generally find it quite annoying because I'm like, oh, another cliche, another cliche. I will say, in Irvine Welsh, you know, when I read A Decent Ride, at some point in that, someone let out a breath that they didn't know they were holding, and I was like, what are you doing, Irvine Welsh? What are you doing? That's terrible. That didn't even happen in this. But there is some good stuff.
Let's hear it then.
The politics, as I said, was quite good. The world building in terms of the politics, great. It's just the sense of location, which is kind of the problem that Cassandra Clare had with the Shadowhunters books, and they were set in Victorian London. And the same thing kind of happened, where it's like, well, because everything's just focusing on these like magical Shadowhunter buildings and like these special worlds and stuff, it's like literally you might as well not be in Victorian London because there's like no reference to anything. There's no childhood poverty, there's no slum houses, there's none of that great Victorian stuff. I suppose Queen Victoria was a character in this.
Yes.
But again, she was only really mentioned in passing. So I don't know whether the first book maybe sets up the second book and it goes more steampunk, because you've read further.
Yes, I have. I'm in the second book, which is Changeless, and it goes much more into the werewolves at the point that I've reached. It seems to go more into the magic side of things, because they expect you all are already familiar with their setting, which I thought was in there. I think it came across in the mannerisms and the way people were talking, and the way Alexia thinks as well.
That's the sort of Victorian society, but it doesn't have the actual sense of place, it just has the sense of time. So I think it did the sense of time well, maybe just not the sense of place. To begin with, the writing style I didn't like, because it's kind of overwritten and pompous, but it's kind of deliberately overwritten and pompous.
That's exactly how Alexia thinks.
Yeah, so it was quite annoying, because she's like an unlikable main character. I'm not sure whether you're supposed to like her.
I love her, I think she's brilliant.
Oh no, I thought anyway. The Scottish guy was okay, but he didn't feel very Scottish. I kept apart from occasionally saying Ken.
Yeah.
But I guess that was because he's like in London society now, so he goes to elocution lessons and
Yeah.
stuff. There were some like really good lines in here. What I found with reading Agatha Christie recently, when I read her Mary Westmacott books, and they were called romance books, but I would argue they're just contemporary, but they're contemporary to the time. But there I was like, I'm not really engaged with the plot, but there were occasionally like really nice bits of like philosophy. And so there were occasionally those little bits. There was one bit that annoyed me, which was when she said that a sound had been specifically designed by evolution to cause fear. And I said to you, that requires a fundamental misunderstanding of what evolution is and how it works. Because evolution doesn't design things. Like, the idea of natural selection is, yeah, like, things get more powerful, they get upgraded over time.
Yeah.
But that's the process of natural selection rather than intelligent design. So evolution doesn't design. Evolution isn't, design implies a creator with a mind. So I was like, no, that's incorrect. What else was
What
there?
about the technical details? Like there was that sonic resonator so that people couldn't overhear the conversation. That wonderful camp vampire that's in it, whose home is really well described, by the way.
Doesn't feel like Victorian London though. Yeah.
No, because he's from the Baroque period.
But that's the thing, isn't it? I was hoping it was going to be like Philip Pullman's Sally Lockhart books, which again they're set in Victorian London. They're about as steampunky as the Northern Lights books, I guess.
Yes.
So
yes.
they've got like a little taste of it, and so I was kind of hoping for something more like that. But yeah, it was okay though. I mean, I didn't hate it. I got to the end. I was worried to begin with till I got to about chapter 3. I wouldn't have finished reading this if I wasn't reading it for this.
Okay.
But then I wouldn't have picked it up necessarily.
Well, I was given it by someone I used to know who thought I would like it, and they were right. Because I'm a sucker for this sort of thing, and also you've not mentioned the love story, which is about 90% of this book.
Oh,
I
yeah,
know that's not your thing.
Yeah, I guess it was a love story.
Well, they get married by the end of it, so
Yeah.
yeah. I enjoyed the way that Alexia thought inside the book. All of the ways that people think at the time are portrayed in her inner monologue. And that's where a lot of the humour is. So clearly that's not your style of humour.
I have a point about that actually. So it head hops. So it will say, you'll have Alexia wondering, oh, what's Lord Macon thinking? And then the next paragraph is like, Lord Macon was thinking blah, blah, blah. And so you're there like, so hang on, which character's head am I supposed to be in here? And also it builds up the suspense if you're only in Alexia's head, and then maybe the next chapter is from his point of view, and then you see his thoughts or whatever. It kind of builds it up a lot more. So every time she was wondering what he was thinking, it would just immediately tell you. And so it was kind of like, oh, all right then. I guess I won't emotionally invest and wait to find out then.
Okay. Well, something that I loved in this book was the way they described the outfits. That's why I've put so much effort into our costumes today. I've even gone so far as to dress up in the style of the bad guys with an octopus and everything, because I thought the way that was it Hippocrates Club?
I don't know.
You weren't paying enough attention. No. Well, there's a society in here that's based on, they make themselves sound like they're a bunch of philosophers, but they're also scientific. And there's also the animatron.
Yeah.
So there's a robot in it.
Yeah, I thought that was actually kind of the main bad guy of the first book, and he was severely underpowered. They see him from a distance a couple of times, and then at the end they just go like that and he's dead.
Yeah,
and you're
there
like,
was
what?
There was a special loophole thing on his forehead that was like a spell. They'd mixed in some arcane magic in with the technology, which I thought suited the world because it's vampires, werewolves, and steampunk society.
I think he used Latin as well, which like that was quite good. Well, that's when I tend to really like it, is when like the bad guy is so overpowered that you're like, there's no way they can possibly beat him. Like Sauron in Lord of the Rings, it seems so unlikely that he could possibly be beaten. Whereas this animatron guy, again, you see him from a distance a couple of times and you know he's a bad guy. And then you get a scene at the end where they sort of attack him and he doesn't really die, but nothing bad happens to them either. Well, and then they wipe his forehead and he dies, and you're like, oh.
I might explain that they're not normal humans that are fighting this unstoppable robot character who cannot be harmed by the vampires until they figure out this one thing, which is the spell that turns him on and off. He survives werewolf and vampire attacks. They are the ones that walk away bleeding, and he's just there. And the reason you see him from a distance is because you see it through the eyes of Alexia, who is being protected by the werewolves and vampires. There's that scene in the alleyway. You're watching from her bedroom window. Yeah.
Well, you sort of, you see it from her point of view and other people's point of view at the same time. But no, well, like, because surely though, if he's just written on his forehead, like he goes, that robot goes out in the rain, it's fucked. I guess she didn't specify whether it rained or not. Maybe they can only use him when it's not raining.
Maybe.
Like, I don't know.
Find something you like about the book.
Well, I couldn't give you specific examples, but the occasional little lines of sort of like life dialogue, I guess I'd call it.
Yeah.
The same thing with Christy, when it's like Christy had that great line where it was like, in a flat you can hear everything, even the plumbing or whatever it was. And I'm like, I don't know what that means, but that's great. So there were like 2, I think, that I tabbed out from that. I mean, I would say overall, and honestly, I'm having the same problem with Jurassic Park.
Well, that's fine, because that's the book you're making me read, but
Yeah.
I've got plenty to say about that one.
Yeah.
So I think it's a testament to the fact that you were willing to read this because I'd recommended it for the sake of this video, because it's so not your taste.
This is the thing, is it's not that it's not my taste, it's just that I've read so many books that are so similar to it. From running my YouTube channel and my book blog, pretty much all you get submitted is like YA fantasy. So that's why I don't really read it anymore, because I've read so much of it that they all just feel the same. What I will say that was good about this one, because I guess the main competitor for this would be like Cassandra Clare's, her various Shadowhunters books. And in those, there was one book, well, it was 2 books in a row. The first time, the same character fell out of a window twice. And then in the book after that, he fell out of another window and fell through a ceiling light. And I'm just like, why does this character keep falling through windows? So at least nobody, like there wasn't anybody who kept falling through windows. Yeah, I mean, I guess you kind of saying that because it's so much about the romance. To me, that wasn't really plot, that's just like background stuff that's happening. So it didn't really have much of a plot.
I would argue the romance was the plot and the intrigue is the build-up to the world in general. It'll be interesting to see if the romance continues to be the main plot.
I won't.
Because they're married by book 2, so I think the fact that they're in a relationship will take a backseat and it'll be more about the mysteries of this world. But they had to get you invested in the characters first by making them fall in love with each other and have this back and forth, will they, won't they, oh shit, they've had an argument, and not your thing. But I loved it.
Well, they were always inevitably blatantly going to end up together, so that's also kind of the problem, is it's like, well, there's nothing.
Yeah, but it's like, how close are they going to get? But oh no, they're not.
But who cares though? That's the thing, is like, even with real people, I don't care who, like, this is what I used to hate about work. You'd be at the water cooler and it'd be like, oh, Joe kissed Sally, and I'm like, good for them, I don't care. Like, because I guess when I read, I don't put myself in the place of the characters. So for me, I'm like almost uncomfortable reading this love story, because I'm like, well, I don't want to know about that. Like, that's their private thing. Like, where's this automaton gone? Oh, he's there. Oh, he's just wiped off the words on his head and he's dead. All right.
Okay, so I think this is targeting itself to a type of person that's very different to you, because the kind of reader who would enjoy this likes getting inside the heads of other people, and in some instances living vicariously through the experience. That's why romance is so popular in the young adult genre, because all of these awkward teenagers want to know what it's like and to have the guts to get through with all of it, and they are not quite there yet.
Could be all the head hopping, that could be why it's in as well, maybe. So you can see different points of view.
Yeah.
But the thing is even then you're not supposed to do it in the same scene. You'd normally either have a scene break or a new chapter, and then you'd swap the point of view.
Do you think the level of the writing got in the way for you as a writer because you write yourself, so on a technical level it jarred?
Only when it made mistakes, but that's the same with any book. It probably needed better editing, but it's a first book, and like, I didn't really get on with the writing style to begin with, but then I kind of got used to it.
From what I know of the type of books you enjoy, things that focus more on events than people?
I don't mind on characters as long as it's not a love story. If it's a love story, that's why it's super boring. And also there has to be something in it to interest me. So like in the Stand, there was a pregnant woman in it, which normally I would have been like, I'm not particularly interested. But the thing that was interesting was because it was the end of the world, so there was no hospital treatment. So it was watching how she dealt with all that, and then that suddenly becomes fascinating, you know?
So you like seeing how a solution to a seemingly unsolvable problem might come about? Because if the solution is obvious, it might bore you.
Well, if the solution is obvious, then it just becomes anticlimactic when, again, like in this one, it's obvious they're going to end up together. So I gave it a 3.5 out of 5. It was okay. I don't know anybody I would recommend it to. That's kind of the problem is because with YA there's so much stuff on the market, there's a glut as well. And also I think there are better ones about like werewolves and vampires. There are better ones for Victorian London. I think this is one if you want all of those elements combined, but you only want little tastes of them, and really you want a romance novel with those 3 elements dropped into it.
Okay, well, I am the kind of person who enjoys stuff like this. I also like Harry Potter, I like Hunger Games. I, to an extent, enjoyed Twilight a bit, but then who wasn't exposed to that? So I think young adult fiction does have a place, and, you know, there are other things out there that are of a higher academic standard.
Just better.
Yeah.
Because you're mentioning the titles you like, and like The Hunger Games was great, Harry Potter was great. To be honest, I prefer middle grade to young adult, but just again because there tends to be less of a glut of it, it just isn't very exciting to me. Fantasy used to have this problem as well. It's only recently that fantasy's, like adult fantasy, has come about over that, because it used to be just Conan and shit like that. I think Game of Thrones helped, but now there's all like grimdark fantasy.
So there is a bit of a problem of tropes being overdone.
There's too many people writing in it, because there are a lot of readers, to be fair, but the balance is off, so that there's just so much crap. So like you have to sift through. This is why I don't tend to read as much YA, because you have to sift through so much crap to find the good stuff.
Okay,
Yeah.
so that's why booktubers are good, because they can read it and tell you what's worth reading.
Yeah, but the thing is then even then, like with booktubers talking about YA, and I'm like, well, we don't really need like this many different series that are very, very similar to each other.
Well, thank you for the damning review of this, but not so much damning of young adult. How about we take a stroll into the jungle, shall we?
Okay, let's go.
Okay.
You're gonna lead the way.
Yes.
Don't move. They can't see you. Okay, Suzie, I think it's safe.
Fucking hell. Okay. Yeah, I think we're safer now. We just got to worry about the raptors a little bit. So, yeah, it's a flipping realistic book. It's making me believe it.
Arr. What happened to you?
This is the Jurassic Park section.
It was on my list because I'd seen Murphy Napier on BookTube talk a lot of good stuff about it, because my TBR list is like 3,000 books. So we were trying to find one that you might potentially be interested in reading as well, and so we settled on that.
Because I have watched the film.
I was going to say, probably because you're Madam Media, yeah. I have watched the film, apparently.
You did fall asleep before the end, which doesn't surprise me at all.
Yeah.
Because I didn't make it to the end myself.
It was pretty long. It was like the book, in fact, in that for the first hour of the movie, pretty much nothing happens, and then everything all happens right at the end. And you're like, what's going on with the pacing here? One of the reasons why I was quite interested in this, there is a sequel to Jurassic Park called The Lost World, which is the movie that I have seen, and which apparently, according to the internet, is a lot darker. I've downloaded it, by the way, so we can watch it. So I went into this book expecting it to be a horror. I guess what is it, a thriller, would you say? Probably
Well, the film...
The film's an adventure movie.
Oh yeah, family-friendly adventure, John Williams on the score. The book surprised me, because when I read it, I was expecting something mostly like the film. But when I started reading it, yeah, we have a cafe in the jungle. There were some scenes that felt like full horror, because you have like intestines being ripped out. You have a leech that's almost in the mouth. Yes?
Can we say about the intestines being ripped out? Did you notice that happened like 4 times?
Yeah.
So like you said the leech bit like freaked you out, and I was like, really? I like just glossed past that. I was like, oh yeah.
Yeah, though maybe it's because I was listening to it on Audible, whereas you've just read it. So the way the narrator said it, it was horrible. Like, oh! It kind of presents itself as a consequence for the real horror, which is the lack of attention to ethics. Your life is in danger because you didn't respect nature.
Because you played God. So in the book it's really well explained of how they can't survive outside the confines of the park. They rely on a specific protein or whatever that they fed to them to make sure that they would die if they escaped the bounds of the park.
Lysine dependency,
Yeah.
yes.
But then near the end, shock or horror, they found a way to get that themselves.
Life found a way.
And another thing in here, we have like, they're all female, so they can't breed. And then the stakes are then raised, because it's like, oh wow, they found a way to breed. And then suddenly, again, it doesn't become like, 270 dinosaurs on an island or whatever. Yeah, if they get out, that's going to be a big problem. But it's not going to be as big of a problem as if they get out and start breathing.
One thing I found interesting about the book was how there was a lot more setup. Like, you have small events that you do not see in the film at all, where there's an attack on a beach, there's signs of a breakout already, like the breadcrumbs building it up. And the owner, Hammond, he's a lot more sinister in the book than he is in the films. he reminds me of like Colonel KFC
What, in the films? Yeah.
Whereas this one, you think, yeah, he's a little bit maniacal. He's an egomaniac. He's got a major god complex, and it comes through a lot in the book, where not so much in the film. It's all just, he says, spared no expense all the time.
Well, it's like that the computer programmer guy as well. Like in the film, he was almost like a pantomime villain, and you love pantomimes.
I hate pantomimes, which is why I hated him. Though maybe they did that deliberately so that you would hate him.
Yeah, make it more like kid friendly as well in a way. There's less of like that moral grey area between like, is he good, is he bad? It's just like, yeah, he bad, he good kind of thing.
Yeah, he's fat, therefore he's bad. Whereas in the book, he's more a disgruntled employee. He's got reasons to do what he does. Were there things in the book where you had visual aids?
So you have the different iterations here of like, this is the different sort of DNA shapes and stuff, little quotes beneath it. We have like charts, so that's an infant mortality chart, and it's just showing that like the number of deaths has increased, and that's like all causes as well, because a lot of them go unreported and stuff.
Yeah. This is really interesting because in Audible you don't get any of this, so there's a very strong chance that I have missed out a lot because I just went along with the words that were being said. And on the subject of said, tell me you notice it in the written version.
I didn't.
Oh look, no, Grant said. I almost went nuts and got tempted to count the amount of times said got said, but like I said, you lose count of how many times said gets said because it is as repetitive as Suzie just said.
But we're opposites in that respect, because I get really wound up when people are constantly using alternatives. Said and replied, it's like, use those in 90% of the cases. So actually, when you sent me that message about like, you were like, oh, they keep saying said, the bit I was in, it kept being like, he whispered, she whispered, he whispered, she whispered, and that was driving me nuts after you mentioned it. And then it got back to said, and I was like, oh, thank God for that. Like, we get back to, it's like over flowery writing, and so it pulls me out of the story. I'd prefer, I mean, just much more functional language, but that's the kind of reader I am. You know?
Yeah, I prefer slightly more flowery, because there were a lot of times in the audiobook where the narrator performed what was being said. So like the child does something in a whiny voice. It's like, I'm hungry, she said. Why not she whined? Well, so much of it got added in, and then the said just feels so flat afterwards.
I can imagine that actually, but that almost sounds like that's a problem with the port to the audiobook.
Maybe,
like,
just like the
like
images.
They've not done a great job of that. Yeah, so I can see, because it's good to give the narrator that kind of free rein for them to perform. But then again, when you're narrating it and if you're doing the voices, you don't actually need the speech tags.
Other things that I thought were good about the book, because I did have to struggle to find it a little bit, is Dr. Malcolm. It felt like the entire book is a thought experiment about a concept, and the point of view of the author is possibly the point of view of the character Malcolm. Yeah, he's that rock star mathematician who says like, you know, that's a big part of the shit. It's that guy. And he's the one who's constantly arguing against the concept of science, like it's the old philosophy, it is the inherited wealth, and the lack of respect to the science is what's getting them into this mess in the first place. And this is a slight spoiler, so look away. In the book, Malcolm dies. So he's not in the second film at all if he's accurate to the book.
Well, this is actually one of the problems I had with the film, is I couldn't tell who was supposed to be who. None of the characters really looked like they did in my head. And so then I was like, well, who's that guy supposed to be again? The only one I could easily remember was Dr. Grant. I remember him. And that's only because of the meme from the third Jurassic Park film when the dinosaur talks to him and goes, Alan! Like, have you not heard about it?
No.
Yeah, like that's the moment apparently where like the series jumps the ship. I think he's hallucinating or something, and this dinosaur speaks to him. So that's the only reason I could remember who he was.
The whole Alan and the different characters thing leads me on to the one major female character. The portrayal of the character Ellie was both improved by the film and not really, because in the book she's barely there. She has a scene with a stegosaurus and they figure out what's making the dinosaur ill, but they spend more time focusing on the fact that she's in short shorts and she plays nurse to Malcolm in the book, but she has so much more to do in the film. It's just unfortunate that a major part of what they added to her character was a fascination about having kids.
This is the adult lady, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, she was totally forgettable in actually both the movie and the book, to be fair. It's because it's quite a loose adaptation. Like, the wrong people are doing the wrong things. So suddenly I'm like, but because so-and-so did that, but you said you're so-and-so, so I'm like trying to follow along and just getting confused about who's who.
Yeah, the kids are kind of swapped round because the boy is older in the book and he is the one that sorts the computers, whereas in the film it's the girl that's older and sorts the computers. So there is a feminist angle in what they've done, but it was like 2 steps forward, 1 step back in what they decided to add on to the characters. It's like, yes, they're more able, but also they're more fixated. They could have just done without that. There's one woman who's just there, and then there's a kid who's annoying, and it took Spielberg to make them better, and it was still Spielberg's idea of what a woman is. So you can't please everyone, and we're still getting better. And you know what, even in the most recent Jurassic World, they were better again. Like, she's up there in the ranks, she's the manager, and by the end of it she's still got a slit in her skirt. She manages to do the whole film in heels, which is absolutely ridiculous, and at the end of it she goes, so what do we do now? Which is a cliche from rom-coms.
Overall, I got to say I still preferred it to the movie.
I'm not a fan of either. I think that the most recent version of the Jurassic films, the Jurassic World, was a better attempt to portray the themes that are in that book. Because in the first film it's a little bit friendly. It doesn't really deal with the ethics concepts. Though, of course, they didn't have a Malcolm character, but they did have, like, the show don't tell aspect. So they had, like, a dinosaur, they want more teeth. And then there's the consequences of, if you want the features, you have the behavioural traits along with it. So this consumer capitalist approach that is your means to an end with the science. Like, you don't care about what you're making as long as it fits a brief and you don't realise what you're actually doing in the meantime. So I prefer the latest film over anything else.
A lot of what I enjoyed from it was, as you're kind of saying, like the ethical dilemmas of like what should they do, and also for me I quite like the science behind it, but because of that, that's also something against it, because a lot of it's just like really dated.
Narratively, I was surprised at how much extra there was in the narrative. I would say about that much of the book just doesn't make it into the film. They go through an aviary, they go along a river, they tranquilise the T-Rex almost 2/3 into the book, so he's not in the finale at all. It's the raptors in the second half, and there's this whole bit where they then go on the offensive, because the systems at Jurassic Park, they break initially, then they're fixed, and then they break again, and then they're fixed again, and then they go and find this raptor nest where there's interest in how they're evolving and behaving, and it's like the scientific mind is taking over again. They're almost beginning to forget the consequences of their actions already, which was an interesting, quite scary bit. It's like you've been through all of that and you're so quick to forget how bad this all is, and then the island gets napalmed, which was like, oh, okay then. I think something that didn't get done in the original film, which features in the book but does feature in the more recent one, are details about the dinosaurs. Because the aviary does feature in the most recent Jurassic World. You do see them on the river, and there's a way the dinosaurs are described in the book, whereas like they move too fast. You don't expect them to move that fast, and it's jarring. And there's this whole conversation where he talks about slowing the dinosaurs down so that it's more like what you would expect a dinosaur to look like. And there's that whole, oh, messing with nature already. They show that in the most recent film because it's all computer animated now. So when the little baby dinosaur hatches out of the egg, he is too fast. He's doing all sort of this with his hands, and it's a bit disconcerting. And I thought, that's weird. But then when I read the book, it made sense. So all of these slow moving puppets, that's inaccurate. Dr. Wu would have approved, you know? Reading this book got me curious about the cloning and the genetic research that was happening, and it was interesting to see how close it was. It was appropriate to the time, because if you think about the decade that it was in, was it Dolly the sheep?
She was 97 and this was published 91.
So it's science fiction about to be science fact taken one step further of, what if we did that with dinosaurs and made it a theme park? By making it a theme park, it wasn't as heavily regulated as actual science. There was a whole bit about if you try to do something for the betterment of humanity, there is so much more red tape. But if you do just entertainment, you can do whatever you like and you can charge as much as you like because it's not deemed as serious. So there were bits of the book that I did appreciate, but I played it on double speed towards the end.
Yeah.
It's just not my genre though. I prefer things with a bit more of a human-driven narrative. So this was a thought experiment and it did that well, but it's not particularly my taste.
If anything, this is possibly a reason to downgrade Jurassic Park, is that I've heard so much good stuff about it that I was expecting it to be a lot better than it was.
Yeah, and it's influenced a lot of cinema. I mean, how many films now have come out with this title? So clearly people love it. Not me. I wouldn't reread Jurassic Park, but I'd reread Soulless.
See, I'm the other way around. But even then, I'd rather not reread either of them, to be honest.
Well, there you have it. We have swapped books and we kind of still read them as well so that we could compare opinions, and it turns out that we are two sides of the same coin a lot of the time. If I like it, I'm pretty sure he's not gonna, and vice versa. It does mean that one way or another you're likely to agree with at least one of us.
Well, I think as well it just comes down to taste, because the stuff I like, again, is generally the stuff that you don't like, but there's generally a reason for it because of like the way we are. Like, you're quite passionate and
driven by feelings and people.
Yeah, whereas I'm like, right, let's see how this works. Like, I want to take this apart. Oh, speaking of cliches, what was that line that was in it?
Oh, he suddenly realised he was holding his breath, so he sighed. And that's in Jurassic Park, that's not young adult.
No.
Shall we get on to the song?
Alright.
Okay, quick before the raptors get in.
Modification is a preference for amber-trapped dinosaur genes in what is known as
Park life.
And dino poop can be avoided if you wear wellies while running through what is known as
Park life.
Dr. Grant Scott Brewer's droop. He gets intimidated by the dirty stegosaurs. They fucking love it.
Park life.
Who's that T-Rex marching? You should cut down on your herbivores, mate. Get some exercise. Oh, the raptors. So many raptors. And they all go clawing claw through their park life. You know what I mean? Except on Wednesdays when I get rudely awakened by the dinosaurs.
Park life.
I put my trousers on, I pick up my rifle, and I think about hunting them down.
Park life.
I feed the myosaurs, I sometimes feed the hadrosaurs too. It gives me an enormous sense of well-being.
Park life.
And then I'm hiding for the rest of the day, safe in the knowledge that they'll eat me if I give them half a chance to go for it. Oh, the raptors! So many raptors, and they all go clawing claw through their park life. Park life.
Park life.
Park life. It's got nothing to do with your crazy DNA techniques, you know. And it's not about you pterosaurs who fly round and round and round and round. Oh, the raptors. So many raptors. And they all go clawing claw through their park life. Oh, the raptors. So many raptors. And they all go
crushed it.